Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Monday, April 11th, 2022, and this is episode 556 of Living Free in Tennessee. And I thought I would just do a surprise live because I was getting ready to record this. I thought, why not go live? If anybody jumps in, just let folks know on my various social channels, MeWe, Telegram, that we're live today. I thought it'd be a fun one to record live because it's a topic that a lot of y'all have been pretty worried about. And I've gotten email about it. We're going to talk about navigating inflation. I've been working on this episode for about 3 weeks because a lot of what's going on right now mimics a lot of what happened in the early 70s in the US when inflation hit our retirees really hard. And so this is a compliment to last Monday's episode on developing a pantry that works for you, on developing a deep pantry, right? Now we're going to talk about navigating inflation. And we're going to talk about it as lessons learned from the 70s. So it's like that 70s show. I should have totally dressed up for this, but I didn't. Anyway, welcome Martin Tisson family to the live stream. If you want to know about live streams, I usually do put them out on social. This one I just decided to go nuts with and start right out of the chute. So, I have two stories in my family from the 70s. One is a family starting out, and that was my mom and dad. And the other was my dad's parents. For my mom and dad, they navigated the inflationary period in the 70s fairly well, like comparatively speaking. For my grandparents, they saw their retirement cut in half almost overnight. Good morning, Greg. Hey guys, let other folks on our social media know that we are live, just so if they want to pop in and participate, they can. Anyway, so that's what today's show is going to be about. Before we jump into that, I have a couple of announcements. One, on Sunday, this coming Sunday at 6 p.m. Central, 7 Eastern, John Willis and I are going to do a live stream with Billy Bond from Permapastures. It's going to be on YouTube. Just check out his channel. That's Permapastures Farm. I do have a link in the show notes that will go out with the audio podcast later if you just want to get to that. If you are seeing this on YouTube, my website is livingfreeintennessee.com. And then you can basically go there, click on the show notes, and it'll show you. And I'll paste them into this video after it's done being recorded. The second thing is we do our Tuesday live with John Willis every week. That's tomorrow, 12:30. And I'm going to be talking with Matt and Gabby of the Sovereign Village Project. They do the Back to the Land Festival. Really excited to have them on. We're going to hop on with them and talk about world events and Self-Reliance Festival and all that fun stuff. And then the last thing is that you may, if you were paying attention this weekend, you will have noticed that the first podcast of this week went out yesterday. Yeah, that's right. I have, for the whole month of April, I'm going to be releasing podcasts on Sundays. And these are interviews that I have done with y'all when you fill out the guest form, right? And you come on. And last Sunday's interview was with Janet Szabo, who is really active in our MeWe group. And she tells us the story of going from pursuing a promising career in science to becoming a homesteader in Montana. It's a really fun story. And she talks a lot about how she and her husband built the kind of life they wanted through being entrepreneurial, through working for themselves. And that was kind of fun. So that of course is at livingfreeintennessee.com, or you can just like on your podcatcher, grab, refresh it. It'll be there. It's episode 555. That was a fun one to say. 555. This one's 556. Finally, if you do want to send me feedback or something, you can put it in the comments here on the live feed. And if you put all caps, I'll probably see it. But also, if you want to email me, it's Nicole at livingfreeintennessee.com. That's Nicole. If you don't trust yourself not to put an H in my name, because if you put an H in my name, that email, it will bounce. You can definitely just go to livingfreeintennessee.com and click on the contact form. Those come straight to me. It's now time for the first regular segment of a Monday show, and that is Tales from the Prepper Pantry, where we talk about storing what you use and using what you store, and shortages are coming and there's inflation and okay. That's why I did last week's episode, right? Is it shouldn't make your head explode, but I understand it's actually really frustrating to go buy that jar of Hellmann's mayonnaise and realize they've reduced it from 32 ounces to 30 ounces, and that the prices of everything are going up. And when you're trying to find the thing you want to find, you don't always necessarily find it. And they might be out of this or that. And the thing is, guys, I was trying to encourage you last week, be creative when they're out of something, because whatever. But here's what's up in my pantry this week. We are madly preparing for the workshop. So this weekend we had horrendous weather on Saturday. It was rainy. It was cold. I had to cover the plants that had new leaves on them that I didn't want to die because I just transplanted them this spring. It was a perfect day to spend inside cooking all the things. And that's what I was doing. I was making sweet potato chili. I was making chili. I was getting ready to make beef stew. I started the sauerkraut. I made feta cheese. I just spent a day in the kitchen all day long. I feel like I did nothing but dishes and cook this weekend. I feel like I still have dishes to do probably out there somewhere. Shh, don't tell anybody. But it all went really well. It's really empowering when you have a kitchen day like that wasn't necessarily planned, to be able to just go grab the things you need and cook, and then, get them frozen and put up for the next set of life. Also, with that, I've had a lot of leftovers, and we're freeze drying the leftovers at this point because nobody's eating them. And I could put them in the freezer, but freeze dried leftovers make really good travel food. I have an aggressive travel agenda coming up. Hello, Lamar. Welcome to the live stream. And that'll be cool because I'm heading to Texas for the Exit Build Summit in May. I'm driving down. I'm going to be staying in an Airbnb. I have no idea what the food exposure will be like there. I mean, the cool thing is I'm staying on a homestead, so that's nice. But I can bring freeze-dried eggs. I can bring freeze-dried chili. I can bring freeze-dried stew, like all sorts of things I can bring, and that will definitely help. So since I don't have a lot of stuff coming out of the garden for the freeze dryer, I'm just using this time to freeze dry some soups and stews that I had in the freezer and some that I made this week, because I made a really awesome chicken stew this weekend. Tactical smoked the chicken and left it up in my kitchen, like brought it up for dinner one night here, left it here, and that became chicken stew with carrots and peas, which isn't terribly keto, but it's not super carby either. So that one worked out really well. I added a little milk to the broth to make it creamy. So it's like creamy chicken stew. Whoo, so tasty. So tasty. Hi, Gary. Welcome to the live feed. Okay. It's also, I do restock. I'm kind of assessing my stores right now monthly and just topping off, because I could probably go a year without restocking at this point with my deep pantry for most things. But, it's nice to keep it topped off at the moment. And right now we're getting ready for canning season. Canning season means pickling. Pickling means vinegar. So I'm just making sure I have enough vinegar. I have 8 gallons right now. I usually go through 12 gallons a year. So I'm going to grab 4 gallons of vinegar while it's here. The reason I do this now, guys, isn't because of supply chain shortages or the war with Russia or any of the stuff that's happening. It's because every year, when pickling season is upon us and I run out of vinegar, I go to Walmart. You know what's not there? Vinegar. They have these cute little bottles of vinegar. And if you've ever made pickles, you know you need gallons of vinegar, especially if you're doing a bushel or two of cucumbers to make pickles, right? So it's a good idea to assess your stores right now of things you know you're going to need, like canning jar lids, vinegar, pickling salt if you use that, those sorts of things. Not a bad time to just make sure that it's all doing well. So Martinson family says, my seed crop is back on track to plant by May long weekend. Awesome. That's probably because you got stuck inside in the rain starting seedlings like I did. I got my seedlings started, so I'm super happy about that. And then speaking of seeds, so the rains, so we had terrible day Saturday, cooked all day Saturday, all from the pantry. It was awesome. Sunday, it was wow, the clouds parted and the sun came out. We had this 75-degree day where we could do all sorts of workshop prep outside, like painting the outdoor shower and doing things outside. And then today the rains are back for the rest of the week, which makes getting ready for the workshop hard because our workshop's outside, right? And we want to do a bunch of stuff outside to get ready to show you all, the hydro system needs to be put back together because we took it down to build the Taj Mahal and blah, blah, blah. So today I did one of my favorite ways of using up the rest of my seed. I know some of you guys don't have this problem, but some of us are seed hoarders and we end up with packets of seeds that start getting a little long in the tooth. By about 2 years in, I'm like, why do I still have this packet of seeds? So with the rains coming, I took all of sort of the early spring stuff like broccoli and chard and lettuce seeds and whatnot, and I threw it in a bowl, all my old ones, and I threw some nasturtium in there just for fun. Nasturtium prefers it a little warmer than right now, but whatever. And I went out and I sprinkled like a seed fairy all over the garden. And that's because I don't care what comes up where. I have a plan for the garden, but I'm using up the rest of those seeds. If some of those plants come up, great. If not, they are not the kind of seed that I'm like counting each seed to start, a bean plant or something. And so that's done too. We'll see if I get any like volunteer, not so voluntary volunteer plants out of that one. If I do, I really like some more Swiss chard on my property than I have right now. So that is what it is. Next segment is the frugality tip. This one's new. Got a lot of positive feedback from this. And I thought I would just go into the elephant in the room. Reusing your Ziploc baggies. It is like totally possible to reuse your Ziploc baggies. And I used to make fun of my mom for washing them out and using them till they die. And then the shortages of 2020 happened and Ziploc baggies were hard to come back. And I started washing my Ziploc baggies out. And I called my sister and she said, yeah, I'm doing that too. Funny how we used to make fun of mom for doing that and now we're doing it. There's a lot of things like that in my life. Heed that when you ridicule your parents for their habits. But the secret to washing a Ziploc baggie, in my opinion, is to turn it inside out. So you get your sink of soapy water. I usually have 3 or 4 I need to do. Turn them inside out and I wash them with the rag with soapy water, rinse them off, rinse them inside, but leave them inside out and dry them inside out. The way I dry them is I put a mason jar and I put them upside down over the mason jar, or I have one of those built-in can openers that you use the handle to crank, and I'll fold it out and hang a baggie on that. And I hang it with the, open side down so that it can drain a little bit. The reason I do it all inside out is that way I can clean all the places where the food's been, and it dries out completely on the outside because when I store them, I'll turn it right side in again and then put it in the drawers. And if it's still a little wet on the outside, you can wipe that with a towel or it kind of air dries anyway. So that's my tip. Well, somebody who heard the frugality tip and somebody, I don't know who you are. You know who you are because you listen to my podcast. And I don't know if you emailed this to me or you texted it on social or Telegram or what. I went back to find who you were and say your name in the show. And it must not have been email because it wasn't in my email. But if it was, I'm sorry. Anyway, somebody who knows they're getting credit for this from my heart, but I don't know who you are right now, sent me a tip. And she said, I like to dry my Ziploc baggies, but I buy reusable Ziploc baggies, right? And she sent me a picture and she said, and instead of drying them on jars, which doesn't work well for me, I use a baby bottle drying rack. So she has a baby bottle drying rack by her sink and she uses the reusable bags. I just threw a link for folks that are on YouTube so that you can check out reusable Ziplocs. I mean, I guess intellectually I knew this might be a thing, but they're a little bit more durable. I ordered a set of these. I'm going to see how long those last because a box of Ziploc bags is, $4 to $5. And if I go through 5 of those a year, then $20 on reusables makes sense if they last at least a year. It's a net zero. If they last longer, I get ahead of the game and they look way more durable. So I'm going to test these out. I kind of got really excited about these. I am not an Amazon affiliate. So if you click that link, I get 0 credit for it. If you know somebody who has an affiliate link, go click theirs because I'm bitter about the fact that Amazon didn't want me to keep my affiliate link and kicked me out right when I was starting to make money with it. Stupid Amazon. So go give somebody else their commission. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, that's the frugality tip is washing the Ziploc baggie. It can actually save you money over time. It's only $10 or $20 here and there, but sometimes those add up. I think the important thing about building frugality into your life, though, guys, is that you do it in a way that doesn't actually cost you more. Like if it costs me more soap to wash the baggie than the baggie's worth, like, should I be washing it? Or if the time doesn't work out, like if I spend a whole bunch of time doing stuff and it's not the highest and best use of my time, that actually hurts me. So just remember that. Like for me, I try to choose things that I can build in as habits. Like, like washing the Ziploc baggies, just it takes 2 seconds. When I'm going to do dishes in the sink, I do a soapy empty sink first. I do the Ziploc baggies first and rinse them, and then I do the rest of the dishes so I don't get weird dishwater that smells like dishwasher on water on the baggies, which I need to be all the way clean, right? Okay, next segment is Operation Independence. This is where we talk about building local ongoing revenue into our world, as well as, avoiding the need to make 30% more than we make to pay somebody so that they can also pay taxes on the money we already paid taxes on. It's called the Independence Fund. We like to gamify the Independence Fund, and it's kind of fun. Anyway, 30-Day Reviews is asking, why did they kick me out? They said I broke their terms of use. And I went through and tried to figure out how, and I couldn't figure out. And then I appealed it. And then they said, thou shalt never, ever be an Amazon affiliate ever, because you have appealed this. And we find you in violation. So I don't know what I did wrong. I did something wrong. Something in how I worded that I was an affiliate. I don't know. It is what it is. It was actually synonymous with my mom went to my website, clicked on a link for a garlic, I think it was a garlic peeler. And then she ordered it, and she's family. And I'm sure they know she's family because I send her stuff. So I think maybe they think I told family members, which apparently you're not supposed to do. Anyway, I can't control people in my family going to my website and clicking on stuff. So it is what it is. Anyway. Okay. So all we're doing for Operation Independence, guys, is it's all I can think about is focusing on the Living Free in Tennessee Spring Workshop, which is sold out. I'm sorry to say. For those of you who are asking me to be on the wait list, send me an email. I'll put you on the wait list. I usually have 1 or 2 people at the last minute unable to come. So if that happens, I can make space. But we are full. And we're working our hardest to make this a really awesome experience. It gets a little better every year. But this year, because we did Taj Mahal, we're rebuilding the outdoor shower. And then frustratingly enough, Tactical's doing it the right way, which is to say the slow way. But he's building it in a way that it's more likely to last a long time, because up until now, the outdoor shower has been a thing that gets rebuilt every 3 to 5 years, because it was, kind of cobbled together in a spot where I had hot and cold water coming out of the house, and it's just there because that's where that was, right? Well, now it's being built somewhere else and built for the long term. So I'm frustrated because it's not done yet. He's frustrated because it's not done yet. It's going to be slow going. It's the one project, though, that we're like, this is going to be 100%. The only thing that'll be temporary by the workshop is that the screening is going to be the same burlap shower curtain we had before. Eventually, that's going to be a more built-in screening situation. But we are, painting all internal boards that are being used for the screening. We are making sure the floorboards last as long as they can and that sort of thing. So that's where Operation Independence focuses. We're making sure that things go well for that spring workshop, because not only does that it brings a little bit of money, and I don't make a ton of money on it, but I make a little bit. But more importantly, it brings relationships in, and it brings people together who then do things moving forward. I think the deep relationships we develop over that 3 or 4 day period of time are the biggest benefit to just having a more localized network-based economy, which is what we're looking for here, right? We want to trade with each other. We want to do business with each other. We want to help each other out. And in order to do that, we have to trust each other. And a great way to trust each other is meet in person. That's all of our pre-segments for today's show. Now it's time for the main topic. The reason you're all here is to talk about inflation. And I first got the idea for this show as I started looking at the worry that people had over gas going up 10 cents a gallon. And I'm like, it's 10 cents a gallon, man. It's not that much. That's, if you have a 10-gallon tank, that's $1 a tank. If you can't afford that dollar, now we got a problem. Okay, well, now we're up a dollar a gallon. We actually went over $1 a gallon up, but we're coming back down right now. It'll probably go up again. And I thought, okay, wait a minute, self. We always talk about looking at what happened in the past to learn from that so that we can make decisions about the future. And I thought, you know what? In the 70s, gas was significantly less expensive. And then it went up, and we had all these things happen. And then there was inflation, and the government made some really piss poor decisions and made the problem worse. But then we had shortages. Wait a minute. I wonder if I know anybody who was alive during that time who I could talk to about how they got through that all without losing their butts. Wait a minute. I have parents. So I thought, hey, I'll interview dad. I'll interview mom. They're divorced now because they were in that period watching their dollar bills become worth less and less and less very quickly. They were there when my grandparents lost 50% of their value. And I thought, well, what did they do? Because they got through with some enough prosperity that they both have retirement savings and do fairly well. They're not billionaires, but they're not looking at a retirement on Social Security only. So, I mean, I call that a win, right? So I interviewed my dad, and he thought about it, for a few days before he talked to me. I interviewed my mom, and it turned into a tale as I got to talking to them. And I have like these handwritten notes that I guess I should save forever from these conversations. It turned into a tale of two families, really. There was the family just starting out, newly married, trying to make their way in the world, started with nothing. Right as the dollar is losing value, jobs are getting harder to have, interest rates to get a mortgage are going up and up and up to try to control the situation. Sound familiar? Mm. Gas prices go crazy. Then we end up with gas shortages. Then we end up with price controls. Then we end up with rationing. It's like kind of the same thing governments try every single freaking time that we have a problem. It's like, well, we'll do price controls. Darned if we don't have enough of that thing anymore. Because, if you just let the markets increase the price, maybe people will buy less of it. But if you set the price at a certain place and there's not enough supply side, then you end up with shortages. And then when you have shortages, you have to make it fair. So you ration. Yeah, that happened in the 70s. I remember that happening in the 70s, and I was a little kid. So that was one family, and they made it through. They made it through relatively well. They worked hard, though, guys. They worked hard. And the other family were my grandparents, who had already raised their children, who had just retired. They made their money running a restaurant in Newburgh, and they sold the restaurant, decided to retire, thought they might go back to do some other thing someday, but never did. And they sold their farm, and they put that money in the bank. And within, I think, a month, that money was worth half of what it was, because it was not in an asset, it was in the savings account. Because the most conservative thing you could do was put your money in a savings account, right? Much more comfortable in a savings account. You're not risking it by investing it. You don't want to take care of the farm anymore because you're retiring. And well, crap. Now my money's not worth as much. If you have a box right now and you have $100 in that box that you put in there a year ago, it's worth somewhere between 8 to 10% less now. A year later, it's worth 90 cents. If you have $100, I may have said $100. That's $1. It's worth $90. If you had $1,000, it's worth $900. If you have $100,000, it's now worth $90,000. That's what's happening with inflation. And so the counterintuitive thing about inflation is that the thing you want to hang on to the most at this time is the money. And that's the thing that you're losing fastest by hanging on to it. And that's kind of scary for a lot of us. And especially if you are already feeling like I'm on the edge of my budget, any of that kind of pressure is hurtful. And that's why we're talking about this today. So the tale of two families kind of went as follows. And here's for context of how much inflation has happened since 1969. 1969, 1 gallon of gas was 19 cents. Think about that for a minute. So 79, 89, 99, 9. So that's 50 years ago, right? It's a little over 50, but just go with me. Just pretend it's, 2019, 50 years ago. A gallon of gas is 19 cents. How much is a gallon of gas now? $3.89 here. In California, it's higher. In some places, I'm seeing it a little cheaper. It's over $3. 19 cents to $3. And in 1969, my dad, the first story he told me about navigating inflation was in 1969, a gallon of gas was 19 cents. And all of the sudden, it went to 29 cents. And that was like a 50% increase. 29-cent gas today would make most of us jump for joy, right? But that was it was 50% more. So in context of today's fuel tank for me, it costs me, let's say it's a 10-gallon fuel tank. So it costs roughly $37, $40 in that range. It depends how much your gas is. So let's just call it 40 round numbers. We're going with $4 gallon gas. I know I'm rounding up right now. We were above $4 for a while though. So $40. If I have a 50% increase, it's now $60. If I have a bigger tank and it was $50, now it's $75. If it was $100, it's $150. That all happened really, really fast. And that same pressure, guys, is what you're kind of feeling right now when we went $1 up, which was like a 30% increase, right? Because it was 2 something and it went to 3 something. And, for those of you in California, I'm sorry. 30-day reviews on the live stream says, I missed 2003 when I could fill it up 15-gallon tank for $17. I know, like the under $20 tank fill was awesome. It was awesome. I mean, I miss it when it was under $1. When I was in high school, it was 89 cents a gallon at the A&P market, 89 cents. And sometimes it went down to 79 cents. Like that was big. That was good times right there, right? That's how you survived on a $10 a week allowance. That's what I'm saying. So the response to that, as I said, there was the embargoes, there was tapping, and I think we tapped into our reserves. I don't know for sure. So if I got that one wrong, just, shoot me later. And prices were going up. So they put price controls on it. They did rationing as a result of that, because like you couldn't keep the gas in the gas stations. And so one of the things they did was if your license plate ended in an odd number, you could get your gas on Tuesday. And if it ended in an even number, you could get it on Wednesday. So it was like an every other day you could fill up thing. That was one of the ways that they were controlling who got how much gas, at least in Oregon. And we just so happened to have 2 cars, one with an odd and one with an even. And my dad had a 50-mile commute. So that was 100 miles a day of driving. He would buy the maximum gas on one day in one car. Actually, Mom would. And then he would go to work with that car. And then she would wait in line with the other car to get gas for the next day. That's how they did that. And for them, this gas increase was a big deal because he was commuting that 50 miles, which was 100 miles a day. As I got to talking to both my parents, Dad had a tendency to be focused on the big picture, long-term financial wealth. Mom was taking care of the details. And so it was kind of a fun little view of how they did it. And it broke into a couple of categories of how they navigated this whole time. One was the way they preserved wealth. 2 was how they got value from the home. 3 was the power of family and relationships. And then I'll give you the retired perspective and some other like little anecdotes along the way of how the 70s were. And by which I do not mean bell bottoms and peace. Just, I mean, I guess that happened too. I was a little kid, guys. I remember bell bottoms towards the end of the 70s. I don't know if they happened early. So the first thing was with the prices going up, the salaries didn't necessarily follow. What happened is salaries did go up over time. And if you wanted to keep up, you needed to keep getting a better job, which meant changing jobs somewhat. And it meant a couple of other things as well. If you were in a stable industry, you were okay. But what also happened during this time is some jobs became scarce because when you have to pay your employees more all of a sudden, you've raised your prices, but you may not have raised them enough to offset that. You have to cut employees in order to pay the ones you're able to keep. And that's something we haven't started to see happen now. I don't know if it will, but it could if we kind of look at that time as similar to the time we're facing right now. Different reasons, but it's looking very, very similar, right? So let's look at that. Unemployment was high. My dad happened to be working in food science, so in the food industry, and people always need food. So jobs in the food industry were more stable than in some other more luxury-based industries. And he had 2 jobs. So for I think much of the 70s, he had 2 jobs. He was also in the National Guard. Now that meant he could do both jobs, right? He could do his food factory job, and he could do his service in limited amounts, and the job had to let him off to go, do whatever, Air National Guard sorts of things. And so he was lucky because he was able to maintain 2 jobs. He had the income from 2 jobs, and he had food sector and government. And those 2 are much more stable than, if people stop buying cars, you're not, you're out of a car job, right? Oil and gas. Oh my gosh, that industry is up and down and up and down. So somebody else on the live stream, the Practical Gadgeteer. That's a cool name. I need to check out your YouTube channel. Anyway, I remember gas lines in the 70s as well. Yeah, I just remember sitting in the car with mom waiting, and it just, you had, in the cars were around the block waiting for gas. So that's how, part of how that he maintained enough money coming in to pay for things. But he also always had a side hustle going on. There was sort of a, and mom was involved in it too, as a family side hustle, but he was always hustling. It's probably why I'm the side hustle queen, right? I learned it from my parents. What they were facing, if you wanted to get a mortgage, you could have like an 11% mortgage rate was good. Right now, if somebody offered you a mortgage for 11 cents, your middle finger would come up and you'd walk away, right? Oh, hi, Joe. Okay, now I know who you are. So that 11% now seems like insane in the world of 1 and 2 and 3% mortgages, but you're going to watch those creep up. They're already starting to increase interest rates right now, and we may end up back in a world where a 16% mortgage is not unheard of, right? And that slows things down. That slows the explosion of house values because suddenly people can't afford the monthly payment at such a high thing. So what they did during this decade, though, is they were mortgaged to the hilt. In mom's perspective on the detail is we were fully mortgaged for much of that time buying real estate, and then they would fix it up, sell it, and buy another one, and they ended up with both the homes they lived in and with rental properties that helped generate income, and they ended up tapping into the gain in real estate that happened because that's tangible property that was sort of following the inflationary period. The risk there, guys, is when you're fully mortgaged and can't pay that mortgage, do you know what happens? You lose it, right? So don't think of a mortgaged property as an asset. So that's actually something I've heard. I can't remember which financial guru says that, but like buy assets that are assets. If you have a mortgage on your property and you owe more than your property's worth, it's not an asset. So your property is worth what you don't owe on it. Basically, it's worth what it's worth. But if you also owe $100,000 and it's valued at $110,000, you've got $10,000 of illiquid value there that is what it is. But that being said, during this inflationary time, that was not necessarily the end of the world. Let's see, 30-year mortgage, 18% fixed in the early 80s. Yeah, 18%. If somebody offered you an 18% loan right now, you would tell them to pound sand, 100%. You'd be like, bah. So yeah, assets put money in your pocket, liabilities take money out. Absolutely. When I do rentals, by the way, because I do rentals, because I learned that from my dad, I insist on positive cash flow. So if I have a mortgage on it, the rent plus maintenance, or rent has to be more than mortgage plus maintenance and all the other expenses, or else I'm a failure. I consider myself a failure. The other thing my dad did is he bought low and sold high. And he was a master at this. And I'm not even sure he did it with intention, but he did it naturally. And one of the things is he and my mom bought a piece of land, and they built a house on it, and it was a vineyard. So they put grapes on it, and they had to trellis all that. And he found, because all the bean farms were going from vine beans to bush beans, he got a super awesome deal on the wire they use for trellising pole beans. He got it for like, I don't know, 3 cents a pound. Used all he needed to trellis the grapes at the vineyard, and then he sold the rest at 20 cents a pound, because in that intervening time, inflation had happened and it was worth more. And we've seen this with building supplies already, right? Like I've got 16-foot 6x6s pressure treated out in my yard right now that may be worth more for me to resell on Facebook Marketplace at this hot minute than to return to Lowe's for a refund, because I didn't need those last two. And that's just a question I'm asking. And if it's more than a couple of bucks, I'm just going to sell them on Facebook Marketplace. And if it's just a couple of bucks, I'm going to decide my time is worth more than that, and I'm just going to give them back to Lowe's and get my refund, right? So that's an example of buying low, selling high. Also, and John Dowie will really appreciate this because he's the barrel baron. He bought barrels. He got like, I don't know, 50 or 100 wine barrels used, and needed some because they were going to make wine from the vineyard that they ended up, I think, selling before they really made much wine. And they were metal barrels, I believe. So not oak ones, like metal barrels. He bought them for $15 each. He sold his excess for $100 each. So you see how it's like scales of value added to stuff. And that's because he had things that had value for use elsewhere, right? So I always think of it this way. An ounce of gold may store value or it may not. And it doesn't really have much of a tangible use outside of its perception as a thing that stores value. This magnifying glass, on the other hand, somebody might actually have vision problems and not be able to get see things, and they'll need it. And so I could probably resell this magnifying glass. Can't always necessarily sell a hunk of gold. And so when I look at things, I'm like, what's its use? Now, raw materials during that time became a thing that if you got a good deal on them, you could totally resell used, because the other strategy for keeping your finances under control are what? Don't buy everything new. Buy some things used. You get a better value out of that, because things that are new lose value quickly out of the chute. So the used markets became, much more appealing. Meanwhile, mom was keeping the household expenses low, and she came from a background where you never really had to worry about shelter or food. Her dad worked in the military, had a career in the military. They'd had a pretty good life. They were able to, she said, we weren't affluent, but we were able to take vacations. And in my experience, not everybody was wealthy enough to be able to take vacations. And she hadn't really learned some of the base level home economic sorts of skills that we talk about on this podcast all the time. That said, my mom did learn them during the 70s, and that's part of how she kept household expenses down. I have a whole separate category for that. My aunt joked that my mom could squeeze pennies from stones, just, buying 69-cent a yard fabric instead of 99-cent a yard fabric, even if she liked the 99-cent a yard fabric better for shirts or dress or whatever she was going to make. She would buy the 69-cent fabric that was bearable, because those few pennies that she saved made a big difference in how many cans of tuna fish could be bought, or those sorts of things. And she would, wait in line to refuel the vehicle when dad was at work. and she would go to multiple stores to buy the absolute cheapest. She would like look at all the sales, and the absolute cheapest one would be the one she would get, for the food budget. And she said, not necessarily to the asset of personal health that she did that, but she would go to 4 stores to get groceries, to get the cheapest tuna here and the cheapest beans there and the cheapest lettuce there. If she was buying, she probably wasn't buying lettuce, but you know what I mean there. So dad was keeping big picture, kind of keeping the, hey, we're going to leverage this into that real estate ball rolling and doing side hustles. Mom was keeping home economics under control, and that's a great transition. So let's talk about getting value from the home. Their first home was on a half acre or acre lot. Once they had a duplex, and then they sold that and moved into a house. And Mom had never gardened before, but my dad grew up in the country, right? He had sort of an agricultural background. He told me through this whole period, one of his biggest regrets is that he didn't originally, as the first property, buy a farm, because he was choosing between a farm and this duplex, and they got the duplex because it was a little bit less money. And he's like, in hindsight, I could have totally done really well during this period with a farm, and he knew what to do with a farm. So they planted and made productive a lot of that yard into garden and grew food. And my mom discovered just a love of taking care of gardens. In fact, when she comes here, she loves everything we're doing here, because during that time, that's what she was doing. The back to the land movement was huge. A lot of people are saying, yeah, my mom was a full-time home maker back there that clipped coupons. And another one, his mom used to go to 4 stores, or his grandma used to go to 4 stores too. So she gardened. And you know what happens when you garden? You're like, hey, that cherry tree, this is her example today, that cherry tree is dropping cherries on the ground more than we can eat. I guess I should learn how to preserve those. And so she learned how to do canned foods and freeze things safely. She would buy from wholesalers whenever she could. So she learned how to buy in bulk and divide it up. She said they buy bulk eggs from the wholesaler nearby. And then the biggest thing is she went from, in order to keep the food budget under control, because she's like, we were always, it felt like we were at the edge of our budget because we had all these mortgages on properties that we were turning into rentals and, or, like building the vineyard, those sorts of things. They were always bringing value to the property, right? She learned how to do things from scratch to save money. So when I was growing up, when we went on vacations, like camping or something, we'd get to bring a loaf of store-bought bread. That's what we called it, store-bought bread. It was a huge treat because all of our bread was made from scratch, that yucky bread that's made from scratch. That's the good bread now. That was Mom learning. And she kind of joked, she's had some horrendous failures in doing things from scratch, but she also had a lot of successes. Some examples of things she did from scratch. Until I was older, I didn't know what a milkshake was. My perspective of a milkshake was that you take powdered milk and you take ice cubes and sugar and vanilla, and you put that in the blender and you go, and that is a milkshake. And if you want chocolate, you put powdered chocolate in there, right? That was a milkshake to me. It wasn't ice cream with milk put through a blender. Yeah, somebody's making fun of me. Yucky. Homemade bread is awesome. It is. But when I was a kid, store-bought bread, because we never got it, was awesome. And those little teeny cereal boxes, because we had cereal, we had, off-name Cheerios or whatnot, but those little, we get those travel packs of cereal boxes that you can pour the milk in the bag and eat. Big fights over who got the Lucky Charms and all of that on vacations. And we could each have 1 box a day, and it'd be like a coin flip about who chose which box, because that was the good stuff, right? The sugary thing. She made, I didn't know she did this, so she pulled one over on me. She made homemade Cool Whip, because Cool Whip was the bomb. We didn't do heavy whipped cream in those days. It was way cooler to have the hydrogenated fat Cool Whip stuff, whether I don't even know what that's made out of. I guess for one of my birthdays, I said I wanted whipped cream from the can so I could spray it in my mouth. But she figured out you could use powdered milk and make Cool Whip. It wasn't exactly the same, but you could do it. she learned to spice up the same old ingredients because there was a certain monotony to the things we could afford to buy and to what was coming out of the garden. I don't find it monotonous now, but I guess part of that's because my model used different spices to make it interesting and to add variety. And she said sometimes she'd be at the grocery store and whatever wouldn't be on sale that she was hoping, like if she wanted to do lasagna pasta might not be on sale and she wasn't up for making pasta noodles. So we wouldn't have lasagna, we'd have spaghetti. She said sometimes I was making compromises on what we would eat that week just because the thing that I was interested in wasn't on sale. And I do remember we did not buy fruit out of season. I remember in the 80s when like kiwi fruit became a thing, and there'd be this time when kiwi fruit were 10 for $1. We'd get a whole bunch of kiwi fruit. You could buy kiwi fruit out of season, but we didn't do it because they were like 50 cents a fruit, and that was like way out of our budget. There was no way that was going to happen. So, is what it is. Oh, somebody's saying that Cool Whip's a petroleum product. I just don't even know. I don't eat it. So, I've gone like no margarine for me, like none of that. If I'm going to have butter, I'm going to have butter. If I'm going to have sugar, I'm going to have sugar. If I'm going to have whipped cream, I'm going to whip me up some cream. And at this point, I don't even necessarily need to add sugar to that, but it's a different story. She would, when we were more doing better financially, she would buy the canned beans rather than the dried beans because dried beans were cheaper. So she was making that scale of detail. This actually totally explains to me why every time we work on a project, she's like, detail, 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 budget, 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 budget. It's totally my mom. And I'm like, big picture. Wah! Let's get 500 people at Camden, Tennessee for the Self-Reliance Festival. How are we going to do that? Mom's like, detail, detail, detail. We make a pretty good team. Yeah, I agree. Hydrogenated oil is not a food. But back in those days, it was all the rage. We were moving towards, you weren't cool if you had butter on your bread. You were supposed to put margarine on that, is what it is. And then the other thing about getting value from the home is that my dad was one of those men who can do anything. Well, he is still alive. He's not a was. I don't know why that came out that way. It's because I was thinking about the 70s in the past tense. He can do anything from scratch. He can fix cars. I've seen him replace head gaskets. I've seen him, rebuild all sorts of different things. He can do construction. He can frame a wall. He can do wiring. He can do plumbing. He can do all of these things. And that meant that when we were in houses that needed some sort of luxurious update, Dad did it from scratch by himself or with some help. And that meant that we were able to live a more comfortable lifestyle than other people who would have been in our same income zone, because we could do things with time because we didn't have as much money, right? We could do things with time. And this is Mom's observations, not Dad's, because of those skills. And then, we ate pretty good because Mom was growing stuff in the garden and canning it. And, we lived in the country, so there were local farmers nearby. I remember them getting whole animals, like half a cow or whatever, or a quarter cow, all of that. In case you're wondering why I have these habits, I went away from that, of course, when I was living in the city, but it was like locked into what I grew up with anyway. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to can all the things. I'm going to buy whole animals. I'm going to learn how to process animals. Like all of that, in some sense, that model was already set to me because my mom was a Back to the Lander in Back to the Land 2.0, where I think we're in Back to the Land 3.0 now. So that was getting value out of the home. She also side hustled, guys. When I was growing up, she ran a nursery business, a landscape business. I don't know if she made and sold pizzas, but I remember there was a newspaper article about her making homemade pizzas, which was like kind of a weird thing that you do. So she did a lot of side hustle-y sorts of things, also bringing value. My dad raised bees and sold honey. Like there was all of these things going on to bring some extra money in. And, they were fun hobbies too. So that was getting value from the home. And then this next one's really important. Family and relationships giving you a leg up. My family on my dad's side is very close, and they were closer then than they are now. And it was a rather large family. I think there were 8 children in my grandma's generation. If I get that wrong, some family historian will slap me later. But I had great aunts and uncles and my grandma, and she had an identical twin, and then their kids, and we all get together once a year for a reunion, and we were all kind of living in the same area, although some lived further away and would drive in, but I was in Oregon, and a lot of the family was in Oregon. My dad's parents were in Oregon, my dad's brother was in Oregon, so there was this network there already. Plus, dad grew up and he had his own friend network. And those relationships made a huge difference. An example of this is the first property my parents bought. My dad's parents gave them the $1,000 down payment. And so they didn't have to figure out how to scrimp and save that $1,000 and then buy a place. They were able to get that $1,000 and buy the place and pay my dad's parents back over time. That may not feel fair to people who don't have that, and I'm sorry if you don't, but that's why having those kinds of relationships are so important. It's not just to get the $1,000, but when you have that bigger community willing to help you get started, it's a lot easier to get started. And that brings up dad's regret. The reason he didn't buy the farm was he was afraid. He just didn't feel comfortable asking his parents for more than $1,000 to borrow to buy his first piece of property. And had he been, more comfortable asking them for a bigger loan, he would have gotten that farm, and we probably would have stayed on that farm, I would imagine. And during the inflationary period, being able to get value off your land became really important. He co-purchased a cat, not a meow cat, but like a heavy equipment cat, with his brother, who lived 45 minutes from where he lived. And they both did all these projects on both of their land, their properties, with this cat for a year or two, I think. And then they sold it. And they may have sold it for more than they bought it for. They may have sold it for the same. I don't know. But because he knew how to work on equipment and maintain it, he was able to do that rather than renting. Like, I rent stuff all the time, right? I heard that story when I first moved here, and I'm like, I just need to buy a backhoe and then sell a backhoe, but I have no business maintaining a backhoe right now because I don't know how. Not ready to make that. So then I bought a tractor. You guys know the tractor story. Boy, did I bought the wrong tractor, but it's gone now. And next time I buy something like that, it will be the right one. I learned that lesson the hard way. And so he was able to do that because both of them put money in, right? Both of them had know-how on maintenance. And both of them could work together on projects that were big. That's another big thing. When DIYing, sometimes it's really helpful to have a bunch of people, right? I think 4 people worked on this outdoor shower that I'm looking at right outside my window right now to just figure out how to do the framing, because it's a platform that's up on a hillside, and get that all going, right? So that's way better when you have family and friends around you who can help on large projects. And then here's a big one. And I had this in the getting value from home. The older generation, so that would have been aunts and uncles for my dad and great aunts and uncles for me. When my parents were starting out, they knew what it was like to be starting out and be like wondering, can I buy 10 cans of tuna for 10 cents? I guess we're not having tuna this week because I don't have the 10 cents. They know what that felt like. They came through the Great Depression. They knew what it was like to have food shortages. They experienced what it was like to have potatoes growing and only being allowed to take a few of the new potatoes out from the edge because it was more important those potatoes get big and be stored for the winter so you don't starve in the winter than to eat them right now. But after the winter stores were so low, they were already hungry when those new potatoes were coming on. That's for my grandma's generation. That's the foundation. And so they would invite my parents to dinner on Sunday. And Mom said a big help was that Sunday dinner at an aunt or uncle or grandma and grandpa's place was a huge help because it wasn't just like a little Sunday dinner. It was like a Middlesworth Sunday dinner, right? You cook, there's dessert, there's food. And she said that made a big difference because they were there was one summer where my dad was just finishing college, and I think they had a big bag of rice and a big bag of beans, and that's what they had. unless they grew it or, managed to glean it elsewhere. And so, like, imagine what it's like to have pot roast in that scenario, right? So yeah, Sunday dinner because of family and relationships. And you know what we can learn from this, guys? Even if, like me, you no longer live close to your family, I have the family I choose around me, right? And if you know somebody who's starting out, you can invite them to your house for dinner and it might make a big difference. So that was a big one. For context, again, on the grocery pricing, a Hellman's mayonnaise, 43 cents for a jar. A jar was 32 ounces. Today, Hellman's is $5, right? It's $4.89 at Aldi, but more than $5 at other stores, and it's only 30 ounces. So not only is it more expensive, scale's more expensive, right? Like more than 10 times more expensive. It's lost weight, right? It's lost 2 ounces. And we've watched this happen over the last, it's happened my whole life, but over the last 2 years, there's been an acceleration of grocery portions shrinking. Like there's more air in the chip bags, I'm sure, but shrinking to not look like the price increase is as high as it was. And I know a lot of you have seen that too. So now here's the retired perspective. My grandparents sold their farm and sold their business and put money in the bank and were getting set for a nice retirement and figuring out, like, do we buy CDs, that sort of thing. And it sat there for 30 days and it became worth 50% less in 1 month. And then they were stuck with, like, crap, what do we do? Because we were trying to retire and now our money isn't worth as much. And here's what they did. They lived frugally. My grandparents, until my grandpa's last year, were still growing vegetables and canning stuff. At one point, they had an acre garden or maybe half-acre garden that I can remember growing up. By the time they were, into the 80s and 90s, we're talking very small container garden going on. But there was always raspberries growing and tomatoes and zucchinis and lettuces, right? In fact, when my grandpa died, he had already started seeds because they would live in Arizona in the winter and then come back in the summer. Well, he died in November. So they had just gone south. I think it was November. He'd just gone south for the winter, started seeds in the garden in Arizona, got sick, came up. We took care of him. He died in like only 2 weeks. And, and then funeral logistics and all that. And then grandma went back to Arizona because her friends were there and her sisters were there. And I remember she sent me a note talking about how it was like grandpa gave her one last gift when, carrots and lettuce came up in their little garden space in their little RV area. It was not RV. It was more like a single wide. So they were growing food the whole time. And that was part of how they were living frugally. And they did from scratch cooking. I remember the first time I had homemade chicken McNuggets, I called them, because I didn't know that a chicken McNugget was just a chicken nugget and it was just a breaded piece of chicken. My grandpa made those and they were the best thing I'd had. I was like, I can't believe how good, because imagine, like it's actual chicken breaded and fried. It's not like ground up chicken meat substance that McDonald's has, right? It was so good. And I had no idea that was a thing. And they did all sorts of stuff like that to keep their prices down and their costs down. And they had a great retirement. They traveled all over the country. They bought campers and lived out of campers. They went, camping was a big thing for them. They did gold prospecting. They loved to hike. They liked to go fishing. They did odd jobs like picking fruit. They would go pick fruit for money. And then, you get the good deals on the fruit and then you can can the fruit, that sort of thing. They did roofing jobs, all sorts of things that they did. And the one thing they did to recover somewhat from losing 50% of their retirement was that they, in Arizona, because they, a lot in Arizona at that time in the middle of the desert didn't cost, it still doesn't cost that much, but it costs more now. They bought their lot and they bought a few other lots in this little town called Baus. And then Baus started becoming kind of a retirement place. And they were able to resell those lots at a profit. And that made a bit of a difference in their retirement. In contrast, one of my grandma's brothers accidentally noticed that he could buy a short-term bond at 20% interest, like right towards the end of this inflationary period, locked it in. And I don't know how, it was like for 10 years or some crazy amount of time. That's not really short-term, I guess. 10 years is short-term for me. But he locked in this 20% rate, and then all the interest rates dropped. So he actually did well just by accidentally grabbing that. But by the time my grandma and my grandpa were in their 90s, unfortunately, we were back into this time where we are now, where your savings account only brings you like 0.5%. You're like, woo, I got 0.5%. And it lost 7% this year in buying power, right? So that was their story. They made it through by adjusting their lifestyle, being really frugal, taking odd jobs. They lucked out on those lots in Baus, and they did odd jobs. They ended up working in their retirement some, and I think they had a pretty good retirement, all set. The grandparents I remember most are those grandparents because they had time to be with us. They took us on these trips, right? Like some of my best times growing up were with my grandparents. So here's how we're going to sum this all up. Let's see. I've got a comment on YouTube here. Dad, my youngest uncle, had Parker Hale meat helpers, kept our clan eating red meat in those times. Yeah. So your job made a big difference. At big dinners at my grandma's house, most of the veggies came out of their garden. They had a root cellar and she canned veggies. Exactly. You're starting to see something consistent here about weathering inflation, guys. Sum it all up. Your savings don't mean anything. That doesn't mean you need to go in debt. That's not what I'm telling you to do. I'm just saying, like, really think about those, how many cash assets you have, or how much you have in cash, and what that means. Because the biggest worry right now is not World War III. It's not shortages. It's not any of that. It's, for me, it's if the dollar is no longer the world currency, what's that going to do from an inflationary standpoint on our side, right? Because right now the dollar is still the basis of transactions in the world, and we haven't lost that yet. But we are at risk of losing that. And if that happens on top of everything else that's happened, it could get a little crazy. It could be a bit of a roller coaster. And the things that I look at after hearing just sort of the tale of the 70s is things that worked really well was producing value from your home. And that means growing food and preserving food and other, lumber. Like we heated with wood when I was growing up, right? That's produced, that can be produced from your land. Find ways to trade and barter and do business with your network, because your relationships are really important. And it doesn't matter how much the dollar is worth if I'm trading you a dozen eggs for a pound of beef, right? It's a thing to thing. It doesn't matter if we call it worth $10 or $20 or $30 or $40. We still got to eat it. And it still takes about the same amount of time investment to grow the things that we need to feed the animals or whatever, or to grow the animals, those sorts of things. Material things hold value better in an inflationary time than savings accounts do. And that's only if they're useful, though. So that doesn't mean go hoard up a bunch of, Living Free in Tennessee cowboy hats. I've got 3 right here, right? Don't go hoarding my cowboy hats. I mean, these are actually priceless. So, maybe you should hoard those. Just kidding. But material things hold value better than savings as long as they're useful. And building materials right now have been doing really well. Don't bank everything on that, though. Right? Don't bank everything. Parker Hale makes rifles, Nicole. LOL. Oh, I don't even know. I was just reading comments. I don't know that, though. So now I'm going to have to go look that up. Parasites can't get their booger hooks on it. I see what you mean. You guys were joking with me, and I totally over my head. I'm all on the inflationary conversation right now. Look at different investment means than perhaps traditional, very secure investments, by which I mean educate yourself on how you can continue to keep up with inflation. A really good resource for this is the Wealth Studying podcast by John Pugliano. He's done some stuff recently that would be really helpful for you to listen to. Like, go back and start listening to the last 5 episodes right now, because and then get on his email list, because he actually sends emails out when he's observing things that you may find useful from an investment standpoint. And then the other thing is your mindset. Mindset's a big one. And this was an adjustment my mom had to make. Her mom thought, kind of thought it was gauche to have to buy used furniture and not new furniture. Right? That was kind of how she became about wealth. And during the 70s, mom had to retrain herself to buy used stuff, right? And then she started enjoying it. And then she's like, antiques are kind of fun and you can get them cheap and they look pretty. It's like she changed completely in this way and became really frugal. Buying used ain't bad, guys. Buying used ain't bad. And if we do continue to have these supply chain shortages, which we are going to, buying used may become necessary for things. Like, I had to buy a used axle for my car, right? Well, my car is old, but you know what I mean? So that mind's like, check your mindset a little bit and think like, what's important? What am I going to prioritize? How are we going to make this work? And then move forward from there, and realize that if you come at this from fear, it's harder to do that, right? As opposed to, okay, this is what's happening. How can I make my life as good as possible through this? How can I make my children's life as good as possible? How can I help people who I love and care about? How can we get this done together? Then we'll get it done, because the inflation is coming. I don't see inflation changing. And then be really careful of assets that are not assets, right? Assets that are not assets do not help you at all. They do not help you at all. Some people in the comments are saying, my wife and I have bought tools of various kinds because they're something they can resell. Pawn shops have great deals. Yeah, it's amazing how you can find great deals out there when you start looking for stuff. Anyway, that's everything I learned over just like looking at the 70s, moving forward, like value from home, building that network and continuing to pay attention to the network, operate as a community, as a family, and be mindful of what an asset is versus a liability. Because if you have liabilities right now, well, your liabilities become less expensive too in some ways. But if you can't, again, if you can't pay the mortgage payment, it doesn't matter that that your debt is basically, the interest rate on your debt is lower than what you're losing in your dollar value, which is the situation we may be in the next year. Actually, I think we already are. Come to think of it, if we went up 7% and your interest rate on your mortgage is 3%, then your mortgage is worth less than it was to the bank before. This is why interest rates are going up, I guess. No, because they're trying to control the inflation. We'll see if that works. Anyway, pay attention to what's going on. Think about how this works in your life. And if you have thoughts on this topic, like, share them with me. It was a fun. If you know people who went through this time, talk to them, find out what they did, how they weathered it, how they made it through. If they were also making weird homemade Cool Whip out of powdered milk. I don't know, all of those things. Anyway, if you like the show and want to support the work I do here, you can do it in 2 ways. 1, get your coffee at Holler Roast. 2, you can become a member. Just head over to Living Free in Tennessee and click on membership and sign up. With that, guys, go out, make it a great week.